I used to suffer from migraines. Not headaches, not bad headaches, not even severe headaches. Migraines. Shocking, excruciating, life-denying, throbbing, horrible migraines. The kind of pain that frequently made my eyes water, if not cry. The kind of pain that drove me to my bed, my place to hide away, to escape from the world and soak in the torment that was my regular migraine attack. My migraine history wasn't much different from many other people's. They started off bad, then over time they got worse. At first, they were throbbing pains on one side of my head. Sometimes they were not too awful. Occasionally they were manageable. As months and then years rolled by, they steadily worsened. They became more frequent. They also lasted longer. When they first started, they'd be over by the next day. But they eventually ran into more than 2 days. And those 2-day migraine attacks disrupted so much in my life. As time wore on, my neck began to hurt. My sensitivity to light and noise became more acute. Originally, I would sleep the migraine out in my own bed. But as they worsened, even the slightest sound my partner made caused me pain. In the end, at the onset of a migraine, I had to retreat to our second bedroom, to be alone and away from everyone and everything. Another thing, I'd always felt nausea with my migraines, but that nausea eventually became actual vomiting. Nobody likes being sick, but I really, really hated it. Strangely, of all the horrible symptoms of my migraines, it's the fact that I'm no longer sick that makes me most happy. Migraines changed my life. As my migraines became worse, my life also changed as a result. At first, when they had been less severe, I had simply dealt with them as they arose. As the migraine wore on, I would shut myself away in our spare bedroom, close the door, pull the curtains, and almost literally hide under my duvet. I'd close my eyes and try to will the pain away. The onset of the migraine slowed me down. The migraine itself more or less rendered me useless, and the day or two afterward left me drained, sluggish, and deflated. Those headaches robbed me of 3 or 4 days of life. The things I couldn't do, the plans I had to suddenly cancel. But I quickly found it wasn't just the migraine itself that affected my life. The fear of them, the realization that they could hit me at any time, influenced so many of my plans and my actions. A simple example. I couldn't take a job where I had to be alert and on my toes all day, or where I would be dealing with customers. It had to be a job where, putting it bluntly, I could be quite ill from time to time, and then make up for the lost work hours in my own time. After all, who would hire me if my migraine actively hurt their business? The sheer unpredictability of my migraines made even the most ordinary things difficult. I could drive short distances, but longer distances always created a problem. What if I became ill at the other end of my journey? Who would I call to pick me up? And my car? My productivity, both in my personal and work life, was heavily knocked by my migraines. At times, I simply couldn't do a thing for myself or for anyone else. One of the worst things about migraines occurs when you're not even experiencing one. It's the fear of them, because just not knowing when to expect the next attack, wondering if a migraine will suddenly pop up and ruin a busy day at work, a trip to the cinema, or a social gathering with friends. The mental effort of dealing with background worries about when it will strike next was exhausting in itself. Those years of suffering migraines were difficult years indeed. I don't miss them. So many migraine remedies, but so little success. There are millions of migraine sufferers, and before I finally cured mine, I searched everywhere for some sort of relief. But although there's tons of information out there, I gradually realized it all pretty much falls into just 2 categories. Take meds, get treatment, medical stuff in other words. Avoid the triggers that turn on the migraine attack in the first place. There's a hierarchy of treatments, each one a step on from the previous one. There's lots to try, plenty to fail at, and of course an array of potential remedies to spend your money on. I tried plenty. I spent plenty of dollars, too. And no matter what I tried, there was always something else I could have a go at just around the corner. Not all doom and gloom? Of course, some medications do work, in some ways. There's so many variations of migraine sufferer, And with so many medications on the market, it's inevitable that sometimes the sufferer and a medication are just right for each other. A match made in heaven, you might say. The sufferer doesn't usually get rid of the migraine. They still attack when they least expect it, but the meds make it more manageable. For the rest of us, though, it can be a case of either soldiering on through the pain and nausea, or just sitting it out in darkness and silence until it goes. And as I found, the meds rarely work in the way we'd like them to, as in getting rid of the migraines once and for all. Sure, plenty of individuals get some relief from their symptoms from time to time. I knew people whose drugs, if taken at the earliest stages of a migraine, would help make the migraines less severe than they would have otherwise been. The results, though, are unreliable. Sometimes those same people will take their meds early and the migraine rushes in anyway, as if they'd never taken them at all. My doctor warned me about taking too many drugs for my migraines. He pointed out the irony that taking too much medication had the side effect of medication overuse headache. A headache caused by my headache medications. I did laugh when he told me that, but it's actually not that funny. Migraine remedies are hope and pray remedies. In fact, during my battle with migraines, I developed a theory that when a condition has so many medicines, and absolutely none of them work reliably for all or even most sufferers, then the condition itself is not properly understood. When I suffered migraines, I would try the various medications and treatments one at a time, and with each I would just hope hard for relief. I quickly discovered that hope is not a good strategy. I also realized that the drugs companies are actually trying things out, and at best getting temporary, short-lived successes. Their offerings were hit and miss, unreliable and uncertain. And they're tackling symptoms, not causes. If they successfully tackled causes, then migraines would end. But people like to pop pills because that's easy to do, and we're conditioned to believe there's a pill for every problem. And pharma likes to sell pills because they make a lot of money. So pills it is. For a while, I thought tackling triggers was the key. On the brighter side, I found a lot of conversation around what triggers migraines. Triggers are emotional, physical, environmental, or dietary events that set your migraine in motion. There are literally dozens of different potential triggers. Most people's migraines are affected by just a handful of them. The trick is to work out the few that affect you most and then do your best to avoid them. The avoidance of triggers was my favorite approach. It's free of cost to do because it mostly requires you to stop doing certain things. More than that, it held out the hope of a cure for my migraines. If I could just pinpoint the one or two things that caused my migraines, I could simply make sure I never did them again, and everything would be fine after that. If only. Addressing triggers does make some sense. For about half of us, there are things that we can identify as prompting the migraine to start. The thing is, how do we know what they are? Easy said, not so easy done. Identifying your personal migraine triggers can be quite difficult. For some of us, our triggers are almost impossible to spot. For sure, if you can spot one or two triggers, then it can make a world of difference. I should know. When I first started out trying to cure my migraines, I tried everything imaginable, and triggers seemed to me like a good place to start. Turned out it was. I found a guide to triggers online, with some very helpful advice on how to spot and deal with my own. The guide was created by a gentleman by the name of Christian Goodman. I worked through his guide and two things happened. One, I realized I had a couple of primary triggers mostly around posture and stress. As triggers, these two are pretty difficult to address, especially the stress. But at least I knew. At least I had something I could do about my migraines. Two, I now had a tool I could use to reduce the effects of my migraines. True, I was never able to prevent them, but if I got things right, they were sometimes less intense. Given the awfulness of my migraines, anything was better than nothing. It was genuinely uplifting to suddenly have some control over what was happening to me, even if I couldn't actually stop it. But here's the thing. Managing triggers is very difficult. First, they're hard to identify, and I suspect that I still had one or two unidentified triggers for my own migraines. Often you think something is a trigger, but it isn't. It's actually just a symptom. Then some triggers are just very difficult to manage. If your trigger is in some of the food you eat, then if you're lucky enough to be able to identify that food, then you can simply stop eating it. It's more difficult if it's a whole food group, dairy, say, or wheat, but it's still doable. You can cut these things out. But what if your trigger is something harder to get a hold of, more difficult to properly address? Background stress, perhaps. Nervousness. Low mood. Energy loss. This kind of stuff is normal. It's part of everyday life. For everybody who has a job or a family, or a job and a family, for some people a level of anxiety or stress is just their normal default state. It's part of their makeup. For almost everyone, we find that such triggers are a common part of our lives at some point. Whenever things get tough, when we work harder than usual, or when we miss out on some sleep, that's when the trigger comes into play. Managing them is extremely difficult. But triggers are part of a dangerous migraine myth. The medical profession is united in one thing. They admit they don't properly understand the causes of migraines. Almost everything that's ever said about migraines in the medical press has nothing to do with curing the migraine itself. We talk about triggers, and managing them can help. We talk about meds. They're expensive but have some beneficial effects sometimes for some people. But meds deal with a migraine that's either about to happen or is in full flow. Meds are usually too late. And triggers, which are good to identify and are where most people's hopes lie, are not the actual cause of migraines. Let me repeat that, because too many people think that if they get rid of their migraine triggers, then they've tackled their migraine's cause. Triggers are not the cause of your migraines. Here's a way of thinking about this that makes it clear. Why can some people drink a bucket of coffee and feel nothing, while someone else drinks a cup and suffers 72 hours of migraine hell? How come Bob gets exhausted after a couple of stressful days at work but recovers after a good night's sleep, but John, who works with Bob and had exactly the same experiences, goes home to wild thumping head pains, ghastly light sensitivity, and vomiting? How come Bob is refreshed the next day while John has to shut himself away for 48 hours to cope with his blisteringly painful headaches? It can't be the triggers. Can it? Both had exactly the same experience at work. Both came home tired and stressed. So both had the same triggers. Yet one is fine the next day while the other has severe migraines. There must be something else at work here. If you read Christian Goodman's trigger guide that I mentioned a moment ago, you'd realize that migraine triggers are everywhere. They are food triggers, psychological triggers, dietary triggers, environmental triggers, endless triggers for migraines. Most of life is a migraine trigger. We all encounter migraine triggers almost every day of our lives. Yet only some of us actually get the migraines. I used to get migraines regularly. You still do, I'm guessing. But my sister doesn't get them. My best friends don't either. My boss never has a headache, let alone a migraine. They all experience many of these typical migraine triggers, though. Migraine triggers without the migraine. What on earth is going on here? The answer is this. The triggers aren't your migraines. They aren't even the cause of your migraines. If you think they are, then you've been duped. Consider this. The trigger is triggering something, isn't it? So if we address that something, aren't we getting to the root of the problem? I think so. Actually, no. I know so. Why do I say this with such certainty? Because I found out something a short while ago. Something that I was able to make use of to put paid completely to my migraines. It's not exactly a secret because so many people do it now, but it's not widely publicized by the medical industry. You want to know why? Here's a clue. It doesn't require meds, potions, or surgeries. It doesn't cost a penny to do it. There's nothing for sale. Let me tell you about it. The missing link. What cured my migraine forever. Notice I say cured. Not reduced, or helped, or made it a little better. Maybe what I learned will only reduce your migraines. I'd have been happy with that, but it ended my migraines. I haven't had one for 14 months and counting. For me, this revelation has been one of the best things that ever happened to me. Here's what happened. As I mentioned earlier, I had been using a guide written by Christian Goodman to identify my migraine triggers. And it had certainly helped. I narrowed down several psychological and one possible dietary factor, some types of cheese, that seemed to set off my migraines. By addressing those factors, I managed to reduce the severity of some of my migraines. I still got them, but sometimes they were noticeably less intense than normal. I was grateful for that. Better still, my recovery was quicker. I previously had migraines up to 2 days at times. What I learned from Christian's guide made sure I never got a 2-day migraine again. That guide is no longer available, but you can still get it directly from Christian. I'll tell you how shortly. It won't cost you anything either. But then, along came something astonishing. One day, Christian contacted me and asked me if I would be part of a small trial group for some exercises he'd developed. These exercises weren't your usual keep fit kind of movements. They were designed to tackle migraines at their root cause. Christian told me that the intention wasn't to relieve migraines but to eliminate them, to get rid of them once and for all. There were no drugs involved, nor did I need to go to a gym, a therapist, or buy special equipment. None of that. He asked me would I like to take part in the trial. Of course I would. Before he sent me my initial instructions, he told me what the thinking was behind these new exercises. I was absolutely astonished by what I heard. First, Christian explained how migraines worked, discovering the bit in the middle. The detail that matters is easy to understand, and it's this. A migraine is the end result of a very short chain of events. It's a sequence, basically. And at its simplest, here's how the sequence works. Trigger, thing that gives you the migraine, migraine. The trigger affects something in your body, and it's that something that causes migraine pain. The trigger is the agent, not the cause. It's that something that is the real culprit. It's the bit in the middle that holds the key to your migraine pain, and its cure. Because saying the trigger causes migraines is like your team winning a game and me claiming they won because the referee blew the starting whistle. Yes, the starting whistle got things going, but something else, in this case the team, won the game. The team was the cause of the win. Migraine triggers are like referees' starting whistles. They get the thing going. They trigger it, but the migraine itself is caused by the something that the trigger sets in motion. The medical profession either addresses the trigger to prevent or reduce the migraine, or the migraine itself, usually drugs to reduce its effects. They ignore the middle bit of the sequence, the something, because, well, they don't know properly what it is. But here's what Christian told me. He explained that oxygen therapy had been tried out for people suffering very severe headaches, migraines included, and that the therapy had some notable successes. The therapy hadn't cured the migraines, but given an oxygen canister and a mask, patients in the middle of a painful migraine experienced genuine improvement in their condition. The improvements were quick, although disappointingly short-lived. But what Christian spotted was that migraine might simply be caused by lack of oxygen getting to the brain. If that's so, then if you tackle that before a migraine even started, then haven't you just cured migraines? Not reduced it or improved it, but cured it. Now, doctors already had oxygen deprivation on their list of suspects for migraines. There was already a suspicion that a shortage of oxygen to the brain was a cause of migraine. The experience of people directly inhaling oxygen at the point they were suffering migraines strongly supported this theory. And migraine forums contain stories from people who say that if they go running very fast at the onset of a migraine, then they can head off its worst symptoms and perhaps not have such a painful episode. Running pumps blood hard around your body and into your brain, and with that blood comes lots of oxygen. So Christian wasn't claiming to have invented the migraine cure he now wanted me to try out, but he explained it to me this way. If oxygen was reaching my brain in sufficient quantities naturally, before there was a sign of a migraine, then doesn't the problem of oxygen deprivation disappear? If your brain was always getting its supply of oxygen naturally, then the cause of my migraine, lack of oxygen to the brain, is gone. Isn't that why some people get migraines and others don't? Because some people have healthy supplies of oxygen getting to their brains while others don't? Christian thought so. As it turned out, I believe he was right. But do we really need oxygen tanks and masks to oxygenate our brains? Do we have to run fast around the track in order to head off a migraine attack? No, thankfully we don't. Sure, oxygen tanks and running are both ways of getting oxygen to the brain, but if the oxygen is already there, then they aren't needed. And that's where Christian's program comes in. Christian told me about the ways in which oxygen is prevented from properly reaching the brain in our everyday lives. He was surprised to discover that the causes of this are varied but well understood. There's no mystery to any of this. 2 + 2 = 4. All he did was link it together. If specialists suggest that migraine agony is caused by lack of oxygen to the brain, and the causes of lack of oxygen to the brain are pretty well understood, then doesn't solving the oxygen to the brain problem also cure migraines? Christian answered this with a yes, and his uniquely simple migraine program was born. And the program is indeed very straightforward. It's just a set of movements that you perform at home. I tried them out, all of them, and they worked. And here's how. So, how did they work? Was this some kind of magic? Some sort of secret exercise discovered by ancient wise men deep in some South American jungle? No, not at all. This is what I learned from Christian. Our brains need a lot of oxygen to function properly. Some 40% of our oxygen intake goes straight to the brain, or it does if you're healthy. Oxygen arrives at the brain in the same way that it arrives at any of our body's organs. It's carried there by our blood. Many leading migraine specialists believe that migraine headaches are caused by a restriction of the blood supply to the brain. Restrict blood to the brain and you've restricted oxygen to the brain too. Oxygen deprivation in the brain is a serious matter, and the body takes it very seriously indeed. It rushes blood to the brain, and so we experience a sudden and rapid increase in blood pressure inside the head. And that's where the pain comes from. It's as if your brain is literally swelling up against the inside of your skull trying to burst out, which I remember clearly as being my experience of migraine pain. Every pulse of my heart felt like a shock wave blasting through my skull, so painful that it made me wince. Specialists have known this all along. None of this is new. What Christian has done is simple but very, very effective. He's linked the medical facts and addressed the cause of the low oxygen. Again, low blood oxygen has a number of causes, most of which are fairly well understood. In a nutshell, we don't breathe in properly. We don't breathe out properly. And the air we do get into our lungs doesn't adequately get to our organs and brain. Again, this is all medically verified. Here's what happens. We don't breathe in properly. I must admit I initially found it difficult to believe I wasn't breathing properly. It's such a natural thing to do. How can I be doing it wrong? Turns out that millions of people simply don't breathe in deeply enough to inhale sufficient oxygen to meet their body's needs. There are 2 reasons for this. First, too many of us sit down way too much. At home, at the office, in cars. Sitting for extended periods is now widely regarded as almost deadly to our health. Amongst many other downsides, it causes our posture and breathing infrastructure to weaken and sag due to lack of proper use, which physically ruins our ability to take in large, healthy lungfuls of air. Second, modern life brings its own stresses and strains. Long hours, tight schedules, family responsibilities, job demands, not enough sleep, money concerns, all the usual stuff. And when we're worried and tense or worn out and sleepy, then we naturally breathe in less deeply. Our bodies are more tense and our breathing is medically proven to be less efficient. We mostly don't notice this happening to us, but this is exactly what is happening. So again, we're reducing the amount of oxygenated air that gets into our lungs and then into our body and our brain. We don't breathe out properly either. I found that pretty hard to believe too. What could be easier than breathing out? But I found out it's true, and it's a deadly failing. When you breathe out, you're expelling carbon dioxide, a waste gas that is the natural consequence of breathing. Carbon dioxide is a poison, but modern life, sitting watching TV, riding in the car, and so on, plus general tension in the body means we're not properly expelling carbon dioxide, which in turn means that some carbon dioxide just sits in our lungs, which is where it absolutely ought not to be. And while it's there, it's taking up space where oxygenated air should be. The oxygen we do get struggles to reach our brains. Turns out not breathing properly isn't the only problem. There are more than 70 muscles in the neck, face, and head region. Tightness in these muscles isn't uncommon. If enough of them are too tense for too often, then they actively restrict blood flow to the brain. And in our modern lives, muscle tension is widespread. Fatigue, stress, and looking down at laptops and smartphones creates huge tensions throughout our shoulders, necks, faces, and heads. We don't always notice it because we're so used to the stiffness. It's been with us for years or even decades. But those tight, constricted muscles make it very difficult to get oxygenated blood to our brains. The tightness acts as blockages, valves if you like, that have been turned to the off position. I know this was true for me. One of the very first things I noticed when I tried Christian's exercises was just how tense my neck, face, and head muscles had become. And just how lovely it felt when they became relaxed and soft for the first time in years. Nothing new here. I'll repeat this for good measure. Christian Goodman hasn't single-handedly discovered the cure for migraines. He's not claiming to have done that. What he's done is taken widely accepted medical facts and drawn them together to create what is, in many respects, an obvious remedy for migraines. His program, called the Migraine and Headache program, makes use of these well-understood facts about how our bodies do and don't work. For me, the Migraine and Headache program addressed each problem area. First, not breathing in and out properly, and then oxygen not being able to reach my brain properly. In a short period of time, those problems had gone away. And when the problems were resolved, so was my migraine, because they were causing my migraines. Nothing complicated here either. The exercises in the Migraine and Headache program are gentle and mostly stationary. There's no jumping around or any kind of vigorous activity at all. Better still, as the exercises take effect and your migraines subside, you can perform fewer of them. Today I do just enough exercises to keep the problem at bay. In fact, Christian calls them exercises, but I call them movements. To my mind, exercises are things you work hard at that make you sweat, whereas these movements are not hard work and they don't make you sweat. In truth, most of these movements involve very little movement at all. It's mostly lots of easy standing or laying in one position or another. My kind of exercise, to be honest. But there's power in these movements because they're loosening muscles that have become tight and constricted, so tight that they're stopping oxygen-rich blood getting to the brain. Much of the program's effectiveness comes from the fact that it focuses on small areas of the body that you wouldn't normally give much thought about. I was a little surprised initially at the exercises. I'd done yoga for more than a year, so was used to difficult, strenuous stretches. If anything would have eased tense muscles, I would have thought yoga would have done it. Turns out that's not so. Several of Christian's exercises were mostly lying around exercises. They required almost no effort. More than once I nearly dozed off doing them. But that's pretty much all there is to it. Once muscles have been loosened and relaxed, blood flows much, much more easily. And when blood flows more easily, it is much better able to carry oxygen to your brain. And when your brain is getting all its oxygen, it doesn't create migraines. So you can trigger all you like. If the cause of your migraine is no longer there, then there's nothing there to trigger. Hope and prayers answered. I am forever grateful for the day that Christian Goodman asked me to try out his Migraine and Headache program. I did everything he told me to, and the results came quickly. Migraines still occurred for a very short while, but the very first migraine after I started his program was noticeably less severe. It started mid-morning, and it wasn't pleasant, to be honest, but it didn't reach the throbbing agony I'd become used to, and it was mostly over by late evening. I'd never had a migraine resolve itself so quickly. Over the next 3 weeks, I did all the exercises exactly how he told me to. My next migraine was a shadow of its former self. I actually continued with my day, stopping only for an hour or so when it peaked, but it was a far cry from what I was used to. But it was a special migraine for me. I'll always remember it, because it was the last one I ever had. 14 months later, and while the memory of migraines hasn't faded, I've long stopped fearing the next one, because there isn't going to be a next one. I had already tried everything before being offered the chance to try out Christian's program. As I mentioned earlier, handling triggers brought some relief, but his exercises were a revelation for me. And they have been for several hundred people who have followed this program since then. It's not an exaggeration to say that these simple movements transformed my life. I'm simply not the same person I was before. Then I was a migraine sufferer. Now I'm free. It's your turn now. You can have the same program that I got. It's tried, it's tested, and it's easy. I didn't need to go out and buy any equipment. I didn't need to join a gym, thank goodness. Not a cent on meds. Not a cent on treatments. No more doctor surgeries, clinic waiting rooms, or consultants' rooms. I just stayed at home and did the exercises at odd moments during the day. One exercise I'd do in the kitchen. 2 others I'd do in the bedroom after my shower. A couple I did while watching television. Life didn't stop for these exercises. I just incorporated them into my daily routine. Now I do 1 or 2 a day at most. I vary them throughout the week. By maintaining that basic flexibility and balance, I know I'm protecting myself for the rest of my life. I really couldn't be happier. Yours is waiting. Click below and get it now. There's nothing to lose. Well, there is. Migraine agony. But you might have concerns that all that pain you've experienced can't be cured by some simple exercises. I would understand that. I was quite skeptical when Christian first presented me with his program. Over time, I'd spent way more than $3,000 on a variety of medications, adjustments, and other treatments just to cope with my migraines. Yet for the price of 4 weeks of pain meds, he was suggesting he'd do what the specialists had failed to do: cure my migraines. I believed in him because his triggers guide worked so well, but even so, it was a bit of a stretch. Of course, now I know that all along he knew what he was doing, because his remedy was neither made up or invented by him. It was, in fact, a scientifically valid approach to addressing migraine pain. What Christian has done is put his remedy into a clearly explained and easy-to-follow program. Everything you need is in the guide. It'll work. If within 60 days of purchasing the program you are not rid of your migraine misery, then he'll give you your money back. No questions asked. You have absolutely nothing to lose. Something extra. I told you earlier that I first heard of Christian Goodman when I bought his Migraine Triggers Guide. Following his advice, I uncovered at least 2 major triggers for my migraines, and probably a third: cheese of all things. Managing those triggers helped me reduce my migraine attacks from 2 days or more to little more than a day, and their intensity reduced with it. You might want to address your triggers while you wait for the migraine exercises to take effect. The guide cost me $97. Today you can have a copy for free. It'll come automatically when you order your copy of the Migraine and Headache program. This is a limited offer. Best to act now so you don't miss out. So, how about you? I don't know how long you've suffered with your migraines. Maybe it's reached the point of being truly awful and life-destroying. Possibly, like I once was, you are fearful of the next attack, anxious about how it will disrupt whatever you're doing at the time, nervous about how you'll cope. But hopefully it hasn't reached that stage yet, which means you can tackle it before it does. Get your copy of Christian Goodman's Migraine and Headache program now. It costs the same as a typical month's migraine meds, but works forever. And unlike your meds, this program comes with a 100% money-back guarantee. Click the link below to get your guide and your free bonus trigger guide. Nothing will change until you get Christian's guide, but when you do, then it can all change. And it can change quickly and beyond recognition, as I found out for myself. Remember, these exercises are devised around sound medical principles. There's nothing mysterious about them, but the effects are truly out of this world. Your copy of the guide is here, and you'll get Christian's Triggers bonus too. It will be with you in minutes, so click the link below to not miss out. You've tried the standard remedies, and my guess is they're having little effect or no effect. Certainly they're not doing the job you want them to do. You wouldn't be here searching for migraine remedies if you were truly satisfied. And that's the experience that too many of us have. That's how it was for me once upon a time. But I had a stroke of luck and found my lifelong cure. Let's see if it's your lifelong cure too. Get the program now. Get the bonus now. And get your money back if they don't work. You deserve this. You need it. Putting it off won't solve a thing. Be good to yourself. Click below and start your recovery from migraines.